Majora's Mask, Chapter 57, The Man Behind the Masks, Part 5. The happy mask salesman drew his carving knife over the wood one last time. He smiled and set the finished product on the counter, though his heart sank when he thought about the bare shelves behind him. "Give yourself grace," he thought. "You've only just moved in. There will be plenty of time to restock your masks." His long-awaited transition to Hyrule's main square had finally arrived. It was just before the Temple of Time's entrance and flanked the road to the castle. The king himself had appointed it. "Onmund, you have been a great friend to this realm," Daphnis Nohansen Hyrule had said, white-beard, bushy, and powerful. "Of course, I'll grant you a new shop. Hyrule would have suffered greatly in these troubled times without your guidance." His old shop remained his home, which meant he could finally separate business from his other affairs, too. Still, his first few customers would likely be put off by his empty shelves. Maybe he should have delayed its grand opening. "It'll be fine," he eventually decided. "I'm starting out borrowing and trading masks anyways, not selling them. It's a partnership with every customer until I build up my stock." His booth was wide and in the shape of a white mask. Its mouth was open to form the counter, covered in a thick red throw. The room's carpet and curtains were just as lavish, and he had lanterns from the Gerudo Desert hanging from the ceilings. Another benefit of the war's end, he reflected. He stared at his finished mask for a moment longer. He waited to see if anyone came, but he remained alone. He took his chance then. The happy mask salesman drew the curtain to the back room, but the dark sorcerer stepped onto the other side. His storage room was small and dark, and he drew a chair to sit at his desk. He opened the heavy tome waiting for him. "There has to be another way," he thought. He read the ancient text mockingly. "One pure of heart and noble enough to be uncorrupted by its darkness. A hero." The sorcerer had found the mask multiple times, but without fail, something prevented him from bringing Majora back with him. The avalanche had been happenstance, the windstorm a coincidence, but the bird that stole it from his hands? And now he had been robbed by a skull child. "I am corrupted," he thought. "A sorcerer, a wielder of magic. I have paid the price and lost my humanity." At least, as far as Termina's rules were concerned. Majora's Mask had not been the only casualty either. The windstorm had also swept away his mask of sense. It had tumbled down the cliff and out of sight for good. "I can't keep doing this." The ancient Gerudo tribe had sealed Majora's Mask away so no one could bring it back with them, unless for a noble purpose. Destroying it, he thought. But that wasn't a possibility, not with the end of the world so near. He'd been skeptical at first, but Martellitus's wall. Too many coincidences. He needed Majora if he hoped to survive the end of the world, and if he hoped to return the dead to life. I can't hide in Termina for the end of the world either. That much had become clear given his research. The realm would eventually steal his memories and leave him a shadow within 2 years. Throughout his time in Termina, he learned quite a bit about its magic and its darkness. A realm of shadows. Despite the initial deception, Clocktown had proven a twisted mockery of life, and Majora promised to corrupt it all even further. The demon had destroyed Skyvale and countless regions before it. Only the final 5 were left, and Termina would be gone. Majora would be unshackled and reality would slowly sink to oblivion. I need a hero. The masked salesman sighed, closing the book again. Finding one would be hard enough, but then he'd have to convince them to do his bidding. A hero wouldn't trust me, and their misguided fear would doom everyone. The masked salesman alone ended the Hylian civil war, and he alone would end this demon's war before it began. The bell rang as his front door opened. The masked salesman stood, threw the curtain back, and approached the counter. My first customer, he thought. Welcome to the Happy Mask Shop, he said, smiling as broadly as he could. Hi, his child visitor said, walking up to the counter. What does his store trade? Masks that bring happiness to everyone. Interesting. How would you like to be a happiness salesman? I'll lend you a mask. You sell the mask and bring the money back here. If you want to read the fine print, take a look at the sign right over there. The blue-eyed boy replied with a skeptical look. If you sell all the masks, then you will find happiness yourself. Have faith. The boy wore a green tunic and pointed hat, prompting stories he'd heard of the Kokiri Forest's inhabitants. A forest child? Here? All armed and ready for battle? That thought conjured another, and as if summoned by the very memory, she entered his store. The masked salesman's dark eyes widened, aghast at the white fairy now in his shop.
Link, wait up,
She stopped short, however, and returned the masked salesman's look of terror. I was wondering if you had the Keaton mask, the boy asked, oblivious. A guard in Kakariko Village was. He trailed off, though, when he noticed the tension. Hey, is everything okay, Navi? Somehow, he found his voice. The Keaton mask is one of our most popular items, but I'll let you borrow it for 10 rupees. The boy uncertainly gave him 2 blue rupees, and he took the yellow fox-faced mask in exchange. Thanks, he said, eyebrows raised in concern. He left, and Navi with him, without a word.
Let the singers tell his tale for ages to come. Let the gods shower him with glory and renown throughout all the lands. May his valor never go unnoticed again. All hail the hero of time!
The crowd's applause was thunderous, roaring into the air and wrapping the market square in a cocoon of celebration. Hyrule Castle Town was abuzz, filled with every man, woman, and child in the kingdom. The citizens threw their arms skyward victoriously, cheering for their champion. The platform was large and wooden, thrown up before the road leading to the castle. The boy wore the same green tunic, sword, and shield. He stood with the king and most of the court, including the princess, who held the boy's hand. Only one member of the court was missing. Onmund was conveniently ill, he thought. The masked salesman wore his black cloak, hood drawn as he stood among the cheering Hylians. He effortlessly blended in with the unwashed masses, neither the happy masked salesman nor the dark sorcerer. His shop flanked the celebratory platform, dwarfed by the Temple of Time's steeples not far behind it. The hero had won. He traveled 7 years into the future, vanquished a great evil named Ganondorf, and sealed him within the doors of time across all time. Ganon was now trapped behind the solid white doors in the temple, imprisoned for crimes that never came to fruition in this reality. The sorcerer remembered the Grey Witch telling him time could not be altered. Clearly, that did not apply to traveling forward through time. The dark sorcerer retained his nondescript stance, even as he pulled his hood back slightly to catch one person's attention. Link smiled so brightly, fulfilled by the joyous future now awaiting him. His fingers were woven together with the princess's. The 2 blonde youths were radiance incarnate, the perfect pair. How fortunate for you both, he thought bitterly. Your love is not forbidden by unjust laws. Navi floated beside the young hero, grinning just as broadly. She hovered in place and scanned the crowd, though still she had not noticed the masked salesman. It's been 21 years, he realized. He was 47 years old, and he'd slain the Grey Sparrow when he was merely 26. Many of his spells and potions helped retain his youth, but none of them could change how many years had actually passed. Time was relentless. He remained staring at the fairy. Eventually, she spotted him, a black spot in the cheering crowd. Her smile faded, and that was all the signal the sorcerer needed. He drew his hood and walked behind the nearest building. The alley's shadows obscured the impending confrontation from daylight. The ceremony only lasted a few moments longer. A familiar twinkling sound soon heralded an old friend's arrival.
What are you doing here?
Navi asked bluntly. The masked salesman barely turned to face her as they spoke. What happened to, hello, how have you been? It's been so long.
I'm not here to chat. If those are your only intentions, I'm leaving.
Her face was stone, unmoving and cold. Do I deserve this? He thought. He wasn't sure. Very well. I need your help.
Why should I?
Because we'll all die if you don't. She paused, looking nervously over her shoulder before turning back to face him. I met another prophet, he said. Much like the Grey Witch, your boy plays a significant role in what's to follow, but he cannot be with you. Your attachment to each other jeopardizes everything. The fairy was speechless at first.
That doesn't make any sense.
You must abandon him as soon as possible. Navi's face brightened with rage.
Really?
That word. He hadn't heard it in so long, and yet it still hurt his head.
Is this some feeble attempt to get me to leave, Link? Because you saw us together in the shop?
His face darkened. Don't be ridiculous. He's a child, and any feelings I had for you died when you spat in my face that night by the fire. He paused, waiting for Navi to reply. But she didn't. She simply floated there, worlds apart. You have to leave him, Navi, and you can't tell him why you're doing it because he'd never agree. Tell him what you must, but it has to be your decision to leave him. Navi shook her head.
Goodbye, dark sorcerer. I'm leaving. You can take your stupid planet.
If you don't, I'll kill him. Navi froze. Her certainty wavered.
You...
I'll kill him. He lied again. I'm serious about this. If you and Link stay together, terrible things will happen. So, either leave him, or I kill him. I'm an advisor to the king, and I have ears and eyes everywhere. He won't be able to hide, and he'll be dead by tomorrow morning. Navi could only float there in stunned silence. At the end of 2 years, he said, you can return to him. If he's still alive, he thought, which he knew would be unlikely. Wherever you go, make sure he can't find you, and once enough time passes, you can return to my hut, but until then...
You won't touch him?
Navi's voice was grave. All malice had been replaced by hopeless destitution. The recent celebration might as well have been a lifetime ago, but she'd seen what the masked salesman was capable of. She knew his threats were not idle.
If I abandon him...
Navi said, continuing when he did not reply.
And if I leave him, then you'll leave him alone too? You won't hurt him.
The masked salesman took a deep breath. I promise. Navi barely held back tears.
You know, I really hoped...
She trailed off, choking on the words.
I don't know what I hoped. You haven't changed. You really did sell your name to a demon. You're not the boy I loved. He died a long time ago. And here you are, A walking corpse, still sucking the happiness from everyone else. But I'm trusting you. In the name of our past friendship, I am trusting you. I'll leave him as soon as we go to the Temple of Time. As long as you don't lay a finger on him. And we can be reunited again. It's going to really hurt him. But I guess I'll explain everything to him in 2 years.
You have my word. He sat in the darkness of his home, staring at a small vial of orange liquid. He swirled around the fragile contents. From his window, he heard the sky grumble. Lightning flashed across his dresser. The king had summoned them to a meeting over dinner, all to discuss the hero of Time's departure. Daphnis was on the verge of sending the royal guard to bring him back. The boy had snuck away with the princess's help, seemingly for no reason. Which did not make the king very happy, the masked salesman thought. The sorcerer's heart hammered in his chest. 1 year ago, he'd set this plan into motion when he convinced Navi to leave Link. It had taken as long to set things up in Termina too. Befriending the Skull Kid had proven difficult. But the sorcerer had offered the imp something he couldn't refuse, the boy's ocarina. In exchange, the Skull Kid would lure the boy into Clocktown. He'd put on a show to convince the young hero they were enemies. And then he'll hunt the imp down and bring me Majora's mask. It was the only way things could work. The boy had to do his bidding, but the masked salesman could not reveal himself yet. The sorcerer worked better in the shadows, and the Skull Kid would be a malleable pawn. The demon Majora had already robbed the imp of his will. And then there's his fairy, the masked salesman thought. Tatl. It looked just like Navi, but he'd hardly acknowledged her. He couldn't, not after what happened with the thing impersonating his father. Shadows, just shadows, no more. But Zelda was not a shadow. He stirred the poison some more. His heart felt like a cold stone, sinking further into his stomach. Fear slammed against his chest for release. It's the only way, he told himself. The boy can only enter Termina if he's lost everything, if he's practically already a shadow. Link and Zelda were together always. The clock tower doors would reject such optimism. And here was the poison that intended to end it all. He'd slain armies, killed men by the hundreds, tortured innocent lordlings, and manipulated entire kingdoms. Why was it so hard to kill the princess? Because she's innocent, young, and in love. How could he kill a girl who'd never done him wrong? Because a realm is in the balance. A world. If he didn't, and he was unable to find the hero, the Majora would escape and slay every innocent girl there'd ever been. The Majora will grant me the ability to raise the dead. I can fix this once the world has been saved. The masked salesman stood, his mind made up. He'd already sold his name and soul, all so he can make hard choices like these. The world would thank him in the end. His boots were quiet on the soft, twig-infested forest floor. The hem of his black robes chased his ankles, and his stone mask kept him invisible. The treetops carried a canopy of darkness, enveloping him with their thick wooden trunks. Despite its low visibility, he knew these woods better than anyone else. 29 years ago, he'd ventured through the forest and sold his name at its border. The masked salesman trod carefully, walking to remain far ahead of the boy. The hero named Link sat on his horse half asleep, nodding off to the rhythm of his steed's footsteps. While he was glad Link could be taken by surprise, he would wait until they were closer to the shack. The dark sorcerer remained ahead of them, unseen, content to his own thoughts as he walked. The hero of time unwittingly followed. After the better part of an hour, he stopped to prepare himself. It was time. He had the Re-Dead mask to knock the boy unconscious. He had the Bremen mask to calm the horse named Epona and to guide her to his shack. He had the Mask of Truth to implement the false memory of the horse chase. This would incentivize Link to chase after the Skull Kid, and only the masked salesman and the imp would know the truth. His fairies would receive the false memory too. All that was left was to do it. The boy knelt before the tombstone, tracing her name on its stone surface. Her cold, lifeless body lay on her bed. Zelda's father sobbed while her grandmother screamed for her to come back. The man with the fox face stood over him, knife's blood dripping slowly to the wooden floor. You got no right having something you can't even fight to keep. He shook the thoughts from his head, walking onward. The masked salesman removed the stone mask and walked several trees ahead. He waited behind the trunk and removed the re-dead mask from his robes. He braced himself. But a chime-like sound stopped him. It was filled with some characteristic of life. He instantly turned to find the source. Navi. She floated by the canopy and her eyes were locked on his. Her horrified stare bore a sadness too great for words. His mind went blind with panic. Navi! He whispered sharply, but the fairy ignored him. No. It had all been going so perfectly. Things could not fall apart so close to the end. She didn't believe me. She didn't trust me. And now she'd caught him in his lie. He ran from behind the tree, sprinting across the grass and wearing his re-dead mask. The boy was still mounted, close by and asleep, but the fairy reached him first.
Link!
Navi screamed, flying around his face urgently. His horse stopped neighing at the fairy's appearance. The masked salesman kept running.
Wake up!
The sorcerer was almost there. The twigs crunched beneath his awkward, frantic gait.
Link, get up!
Epona whined loudly, and Link shot awake, grabbing the reins before he fell. He blinked sheepishly, confused by the fairy's appearance.
Link, you have to get up easier!
Navi spotted the dark sorcerer as he reached Epona. The blood in the horse's veins froze in obedience to the magic, and the masked salesman felt the beast's racing heart.
No!
Navi screamed. The masked salesman felt Link pulling on Epona's reins, trying to get her to move. Navi? The boy asked. The dark sorcerer kept staring at Epona, trying to ignore Navi's frantic flying and screaming. Too much is happening at once. As soon as he let go of Epona, she might trample him, but he didn't want to kill her either. The animal's eyes were wide with fear, but Navi's voice cut through all other considerations.
You said you'd leave him alone!
Navi screamed.
You promised you wouldn't hurt him, you liar!
Navi, stop, he thought.
Get out of here!
Please, fly away and don't look back. He willed her to leave while she still could.
Get out of here and never come back!
You have to go. But Link reached for his weapon. The masked salesman turned from Epona to Navi. She froze, instantly losing her voice. Her blood was his to command. He heard Epona rear up now that she was free, and Link tried his best to calm her. Navi trembled as she stared into the re-dead's dark eyes. She could see his true ones through the slits of the mask, and in hers, the masked salesman saw only willpower. A will to fight for what she loved and never give up. A will to defy everything that stood in her way. One thought broke through all the rest. He could not weigh her life against the fate of the world. I'm sorry. The dark sorcerer twisted her neck in a half circle. It broke. Her light went out as the sharp snap echoed through the trees. Her lifeless gray body floated to the forest floor. Link hit the ground first, on his back. Epona, by some miracle, missed the dark sorcerer, fleeing from the re-dead face as far as she could. The masked salesman looked to the hero, who mistakenly made eye contact. Now, Link was his puppet too. He flooded Link's skull with blood, clouding his thoughts to rip consciousness away. The boy collapsed with little resistance, eyes rolling back into his head. The hero of time soon lay motionless in the grass, eyes closed. For a moment, the masked salesman only stood there. He realized he was out of breath. He might faint. Panic, he recognized. He refused to turn around and see what he'd done. No, I imagined it. But he remembered the snapping sound, and he began to tremble more. Please don't let it be true. Eventually, he found Navi, lying dead behind him. The air caught in his throat, and he removed the re-dead mask, letting it fall to the grass. "Navi," he began, his voice shaking. "Don't be stupid. You killed her. It was you." He stumbled awkwardly to her side, kneeling to scoop her body into his hands. The leaves parted so that a ray of sunlight shone through. It fell upon them, warming the bloodless slaughter with a day's waning touch. The grass, her body, his hands, the very wind, it was all golden. He remembered sharing a moment like that with her, in this very forest. He recalled the strength that had brought them both. The wind whispered his forgotten name as its final keeper left this world forever. He pressed Navi against his forehead, squeezing his eyes shut as he shivered in the golden light. The masked salesman dragged the boy across the basement, throwing him against the clock tower doors. He noted the long, slender cut torn into Link's left leg. It had caught on a rock while dragging him to his horse. Link was still unconscious, though the masked salesman had seen him stir when he'd been burying. "No, don't think about that." He couldn't. The boy would wake up soon, and emotions were only a hindrance. "You have to get this done. After everything you've sacrificed, you can't give up now." He pulled the ocarina out of the boy's belt, wore his re-dead mask, and sat on his piano bench. He grasped the wooden shard. "Since I'm bringing Link with me, we'll both be teleported to the room with the Deku flower." It only took one new passenger for both parties to make the long walk, which is what I planned for. The imp should already be there. He played the Song of Healing, and Hyrule became Termina. The boy landed on the Deku flower, still unconscious. The dark sorcerer had perfected his own appearance, already a dark, looming figure the instant he materialized. They were in the underground room again, where he'd first found the imprisoned Skull Child. Now, the Skull Kid floated between two lit torches, a purple and white fairy flanking him. The orange eyes of the mask were evil. Majora's mask. The masked salesman refused to make eye contact with the white fairy.
You brought the boy,
the Skull Kid said emptily.
"Oh, more than just that,"
the dark sorcerer said, his face hidden behind the re-dead mask. He held out the Ocarina of Time, palm up, its deep blue, rich and mysterious. The Skull Kid swiped it like a toddler.
"A wizard always keeps his word."
The imp looked up, his expression also hidden behind a mask. The two fairies simply floated in silence, staring at them. Dumb, stupid shadows. The Skull Kid was stupid too, but Majora had probably influenced him to be more observant. The sorcerer, the boy, and the mask were the only beings from beyond Termina. The Skull Child had no more worth than the fairies.
So you want me to lead him out? Make this little boy think I stole it?
"Yes."
the dark sorcerer said.
"You met him in the forest and robbed him, stealing his horse and causing him to chase after you. You threw some unlit explosives in his face. He ran into a hole and woke up to find you here."
How will I explain why I don't have his horse?
"Tell him you got rid of it. I don't care."
The imp seemed skeptical, tossing his new instrument up and down.
And how will you make him believe these things?
"I intend to make him and your fairies believe them. I have magic that can bend their minds. Only you and I will know the truth. They will remember the horse chase, too."
The Skull Kid stopped, cocking his head to the side.
But my fairies just heard you say that.
"That's okay,"
the mask salesman said. He reached into its robes to grab the Mask of Truth, noticing the fairies grow tense.
"They won't remember a thing."
Wait,
The white one began. Oh, but he didn't wait. He changed his face, and he entered the fairies' minds, implanting the memory. It was easy. The Shadow's minds are weak. He turned to Link, flipping him onto his back, and peeled his eyelids open. Meanwhile, the Skull Kid looked at his dazed fairies with interest. The sorcerer's painted golden eye went into Link's blue ones. The masked salesman forced imagery of the chase upon Link. But instead, Navi flooded in and disrupted the lie. He saw her neck snap from Link's perspective, and he spun back as he fell off a horse. No, the masked salesman thought, steering Link's mind elsewhere. A horse chase. The imp stole your ocarina. But instead, he saw Zelda's cold, lifeless body on the bed. No! He tried to redirect Link to their confrontation in the forest, to erase it, to block it out, but his mind kept returning to Zelda. The imp stole your ocarina. He was rushing back to the castle gates, the letter of her sickness in his hands. A powerful, invisible blast separated the connection. The dark sorcerer stumbled back in shock. Link gasped, his blue eyes wide in shock. Then he fell limp and unconscious again. Din! The masked salesman cursed. He bent to the hero's side and checked for his pulse. What have I done? Thankfully, Link lived. He wasn't sure what the damage had been, but the sorcerer probably had erased more than he intended. Had he erased their meeting in Hyrule? Would he recognize him if he saw him in the clock tower? Has he forgotten about Zelda? He felt the Skull Kid's eyes burning at his back, and so he turned around.
It is finished,
The sorcerer said, feigning confidence as the two fairies began to stir.
Remember your role.
Then he switched masks, ensuring the imp did not see his face. The stone mask concealed him once more, and as far as the imp was concerned, he disappeared. He was less sure the illusion worked on Majora, though. Shortly after, Link awoke, feeling as if he'd fallen from above. The masked salesman was finally healed enough to return to Termina. He remembered his night of injury with unfortunate clarity. Believe in your strengths. Believe. Well, he'd believed in Link a little too much. After healing the boy of his Deku Scrub curse and sending him out the door, the tower had almost collapsed again in the news cycle. The Dark Sorcerer hadn't been as lucky for the second clock tower collapse. A chunk of stone fell free and broke his arm before he could escape. He'd crawled to the door, watching as his piano's Termina reflection was destroyed. He hoped time travel would reverse it, but hadn't been back to confirm yet. The masked salesman waited 3 days for his arm to heal, which had taken his full supply of blue potion. It was now only numbly sore and inflamed. But I can't wait anymore, the masked salesman thought. Who knows what's happened in my absence? Surely, if the clock tower had finished falling, Termina would have been wiped away, and Majora would have burst from the stone altar ready to consume all life in Hyrule. Given that hadn't happened, he was optimistic. He gathered his belongings, realizing that anything could have happened in 72 Hyrule hours. The Ocarina of Time is a powerful artifact, the masked salesman thought. Even more so than my piano. He'd expected the ocarina to provide a weapon against the Skull Kid, but he hadn't expected it to rewind all of reality back to the moment Link entered Clocktown. He'd made the discovery while waiting in the tower as the first apocalypse roared outside. The Dark Sorcerer had planned to leave at the final second should the hero fail, as the world around him ended. But then it hadn't. The roar of fire and brimstone gave way to birds chirping, and the masked salesman had watched as the doors opened, as if Link was entering again for the first time. Astounded, the masked salesman had followed Link around invisible the rest of that cycle, only getting ahead of him when Link went to the tower to heal his Deku Scrub form. He'd learned quickly that all objects and people from outside Termina defied the ocarina's magic, remaining anchors as everything else in Termina rewound. Like myself, he thought. That's why I went back in time. Of course, there was something even more concerning in Link's orbit now. Tatl. They acted like fast friends, just like the Dark Sorcerer and his father had. It will be his downfall, he thought, especially if he thought of her as Navi. I will have to fix that, though he'd have to convince Link to give her up. If the masked salesman killed Tatl, Link might become too consumed by anger and hate to retain his hero status. Then, Link couldn't remove Majora either, and they'd be back to square one. No, the Dark Sorcerer would have to create a scenario where Link chose to abandon her. The masked salesman had seen the magic of Termina work. He knew it would drink Link's sorrow like a thirsty animal, warping the boy further into a shadow that could do his bidding. And most importantly, into a shadow with his heroism intact, just long enough to subdue Majora. The masked salesman stretched his fingers to play the Song of Healing. A familiar falling sensation overtook him, and then he was opening the clock tower doors with the stone mask on. He almost turned to enter the tower and check for his piano, but he stopped when he saw that the South Clocktown gate was gone. What? He thought in alarm. The Dark Sorcerer turned to see the Skull Kid hovering high above the plaza, watching wreckage that still burned across all of South Clocktown. Well, this is interesting. Somehow, the Skull Kid was defying the time loops now. But how? Majora's mask had not granted him immunity the first time, so why would it now? He pursed his lips, realizing his plan to remove Tatl would have to wait until he solved this new puzzle. The Skull Kid is forcing a confrontation with Link, the masked salesman theorized, but he would have to confirm that with a villager. And then, the Dark Sorcerer would have to end this little game. Link could not keep hiding. The inn. That's where the boy is. He would check to make sure, but he was almost certain. As he had in Hyrule, he'd befriended Anju on more than one cycle. I'll have to share that with the imp. After all, the Skull Kid still thought he and the masked salesman were friends, and what better way to prove that than by offering the boy and innkeeper on a silver platter? I'm not sure you realize exactly who you've crossed swords with, the masked salesman said. It was dark within the clock tower. Link spun in a futile search for the sorcerer's sword drawn. His wild blue eyes were fierce with anger. The stone mask shrouded the Dark Sorcerer in magical shadow as his boots stepped softly along the wooden platform. The pole turned between them, powering the machinery clanking far above. You will do what I ask of you, Link. This would have been so much easier if you just left when I told you to. The boy in the green hat spun in the direction of his voice again, but his eyes passed right over him. The hero's breaths were unsteady as his malice gave way to fear. The masked salesman smiled. He backed into the railing and replaced his mask with the re-dead one. Link saw those dark pits before he could stop himself and lose control. The hero of time became a puppet, and his veins were the strings. I've given him too much free will, the masked salesman thought. If he continues down this path, Majora will raise everything. You are nothing but a pawn, he said. Tatl realized that. Tatl resigned to the fate I gave her. The masked salesman twisted Link's left hand back so the golden sword fell from his grasp. The sorcerer felt Link's muscles twitch to express the pain, and only his lips could tremble. You will not defy me, he thought. You can't. He would bring order and safety to a world intent on spiraling into chaos. He's found me out and ruined my plan, but he hasn't won, the Dark Sorcerer thought. You will get me that mask, he said. He forced Link to his knees and stepped closer. Even if I have to walk you up that tower myself. He twisted each of Link's limbs, relishing the anger and terror swirling around the boy's racing heart. It is all mine. I can't kill you, but I can make all the emotional pain you felt physical. He closed the last of the space between them. Remember how powerless you feel. Remember how out of control you truly are. I'm always in command, even when I don't wear my mask. You're nothing. Maybe when I'm done with you, I can turn you into a mask too, and you can join the collection. He bent down to bring the re-dead face just before Link's. I own you, he whispered softly. Suddenly, nothing mattered except him, Link, and the anger between them. Navi learned, Tatl learned, Tail learned, Anju learned, Zelda learned. The masked salesman saw a spark in Link's eyes at the mention of his beloved, and the sorcerer's smile became even more twisted from behind the mask. The poison I slipped into her water racked her with pain. Did I tell you she writhed in agony in her final moments? It was so cleverly done. Not even the caretakers thought to question whether it was actually a disease. The masked salesman remembered the small boy shivering in the back of his house, staring at terrible gray eyes that had stolen his entire family away. In that moment, Link's eyes were gray too. This reckless hero sought to steal the power of necromancy from him, condemning all his family to the grave for eternity. The dark sorcerer returned that cruelty in full. She screamed for you, but you weren't there to save her. When the masked salesman pulled back from Link's ear, he found the boy's eyes were no longer dark blue or gray. The entire eyeball glowed a sinister purple. The dark sorcerer's brow furrowed, and suddenly, an invisible force struck him in the stomach. The masked salesman flew across the room, mouth wide and O-shaped, as he slammed into the railing. He quickly scrambled to his feet as Link stood too. Despite staring into the hero's now purple eyes, the boy refused his control. He fought off the mask's effects. That's impossible, he thought. Where's Tatl? Link asked, but the voice was not his own. Anger was etched into every line of his face as his purple eyes bore into his enemy dangerously. The masked salesman tried his best to command the terror growing in his body. No one had resisted the re-dead mask before. He took it off and tossed it aside, hoping direct eye contact would help. I don't know. I gave her to the Skull Kid. Please. She's not dead. You don't understand. Link moved his arms in a strange, circular motion, as if preparing a spell. The masked salesman's eyes widened even further. His usual smile was far, far away. The tower shook as another earthquake traveled across Termina. It's Hyrule's only hope. Everyone's going to die. I had to. Link, listen. But it wasn't Link who was listening. He pointed his fingertips at the sorcerer, and a purple lightning bolt erupted outward. It struck the masked salesman directly in the chest, and he spiraled over the railing, falling to crash into the wooden ramp. Pain shot through his limbs and became his only reality. The masked salesman opened his mouth to scream, but all air had left. His head fell to the ground limply, and the world blurred. For a handful of terrifying moments, the dark sorcerer thought he was dying, but then reality returned, a cruel hammer pounding against his chest. He coughed. Blood dribbled down his chin and onto the wood. The masked salesman shuddered. The pain was surreal as his only working hand gingerly touched the wound he'd suffered. His left arm was broken, and his legs screamed in pain too. But it was the lightning bolt that would kill him. He groaned as he used his one working arm to drag himself along the ramp. His purple robes were soaked with blood, sagging against the floor as it spread around him. I have to make it to my masks, or I'll die. He shook terribly as he crawled, but he wasn't sure if he would make it. What have I done? The mask had infected the boy. If Link ever returned to Hyrule or he failed to stop the imp, then all the worlds will end in fire. He had to survive. The masked salesman pulled himself another inch along the slope, fighting the excruciating pain. He did not stop crawling, even when all hope threatened to flee. Pain did its best to paralyze him, all while the clock tower rattled below the nearing apocalypse. Each stride seemed to come slower and harder than the last. I've been under here before when the world has ended. Twice. But the first time, Link had played the Song of Time, and the second, the masked salesman had escaped. Neither might happen this time. He wondered if Link would risk it all to save Tatl. There's no way you can save her, Link. You have no idea where she is, and there's hardly 2 hours left. 2 hours. Only 2 hours to reach the door. Except I don't even have that long. The tower will fall before then. The masked salesman crawled and crawled. His injuries were daggers lodged in his limbs and torso, their hilts dragging along the wooden ramp and twisting deeper inside his flesh. He left a thick trail of blood drawn behind him, and he grew fainter faster than he'd hoped. Maybe the fall will kill me, he thought. Unless he got to his masks, the lightning bolt on his chest would be the least of his worries. Somehow, he made it. Somehow, he dragged his bag to the clock tower doors, even as stones and wood fell around him. Somehow, he pulled out the twin shard and made the short distance. He did all of that, despite the pain, the fire, the shaking, and the tower's groaning foundations. His bloody hand rested on the door's wooden surface, and he gripped the wooden shard and willed himself away. The masked salesman fell onto the brown rock of his lair's basement. The backpack fell beside him, but he hardly gave it any notice. The sounds and smells of the tower collapsing vanished instantly, but the pain remained. The dark sorcerer crawled quickly to his back table, rising to grab the mask on its surface. It was gray and grated where the mouth was. The all-night mask. He put it over his face and fell back onto the floor. At least now I can't die. But the hurry was not any less urgent. Though his mind was immortal while wearing it, his body was not. Should it shut down before he healed, he would be trapped in an immobile body for all eternity, unable to remove the mask. And that would be a fate far worse than death. The masked salesman crawled to his piano bench, lifting himself up and lying on its surface. He couldn't sit, but he lifted his one working arm nonetheless and played the song of healing. Please, heal me. The music soothed him, and he felt the pain ebbing. But even after he finished, the wounds were still there. It takes time, as he knew. The song started the healing process, but he knew other ways to speed it along. The masked salesman had never known such agony. He clutched his chest, gritting his teeth in pain as he eased himself back into his chair. He lifted his loose clothing to look at the tender black mark underneath. It had only grown. While his other wounds faded, this one worsened. He remembered the witch's words from long ago when she told him that the song only manipulated the light in others. There is no light in this dark mark, he thought. The blue potion kept it at bay, but it could not forever. The dark sorcerer grabbed his crutch and hobbled his way to the staircase. I'm going to die. He knew that now. The first 2 days, he'd been in denial, poring through every book in his possession, meticulously looking for the solution. But there wasn't one. This demon, his darkness incarnate and its magic is unparalleled.
Your fates will be inescapably bound as one,
The Grey Witch had said. Could it be true? Had he been drawn to this demon by fate, to be slain by it? Had his name been Majora? No, it can't be. The masked salesman continued his climb, pushing open the secret door into the dark upper room of the shack. He went further to the outside. He saw the sea. It was loud and blue, and it seemed more beautiful than ever. Everything here is more beautiful after spending so long in that realm of shadows. The sun reflected over the waves that rolled into the rocks, dashing them forever. The smells of the sea and forest seeped into his bones, lending them strength. The horse neighed fearfully at his return. The sorcerer watched the animal shy away, but her reins only let her go so far. The masked salesman had her tethered under the awning. Her dark eyes shone with suspicion. She buzzed her lips in protest as she turned to the near-empty pail at her heels. I'll fill that for you in a minute. he said absently, refusing to look at what lay near Epona. A small grave, as he walked toward the cliff. The masked salesman used his cane to reach the edge. Once his other injuries completely healed, he would no longer need it. Thankfully, the dark mark had not stolen his ability to walk yet. He stared outward across the beautiful ocean. He tried to empty his mind, to simply take his surroundings in. I want another golden moment. But one didn't come. Instead, his chest seared with a pain that knocked his breath away. The masked salesman fell to his side despite the cane, crawling away from the ledge and leaping as the pain in his chest throbbed. Make it stop. The sorcerer gripped at the black mark as if that could help. I'm going to die. What could he do now? Nothing. He wondered if Link was alive and what had become of the Skull Kid. If Majora won, then the demon would have burst through my shack by now. Had the boy wiped the masked salesman from the playing board? I underestimated him. Clearly, Link knew magic he didn't, or else Link's black mark would have killed him long ago. He used it to fight back at me. There was light mixed with it. Somehow there had to be. From the Ocarina? He wondered. It seemed to be the only explanation. I have to get the mask, he stammered, still lying on the ground. I have to. But he never would. He had sold his name to a demon, and therefore was forbidden by ancient magic from possessing it. He had a curse seared into his chest that would slowly kill him. Hyrule would end sometime this year in a great flood, unless Majora broke out before that and ended it even sooner. I failed. The words Navi had spoken to him over a year ago returned to him unexpectedly.
You know, I really hope. I don't know what I hope. You haven't changed. You really did sell your name to a demon. You're not the boy I met all those years past. He died a long time ago.
He raised his head and finally turned to the small mound of dirt rising beside Link's horse. Tears shone in the masked salesman's eyes as he managed to stand and limp toward it.
I know you'll do the right thing,
Navi had said.
I love you, and I always will.
The masked salesman collapsed again at the grave.
He thinks growing up corrupts people.
Navi had said.
That's why he thinks the Kokiri are so pure. But you've changed so much since you were a boy. You've matured and become a better person. You're responsible and capable.
He placed his hand softly on the pile of dirt, hating the tears that came. You're the one thing I wish I could change, he whispered. I want to take it back, Navi. I do. I want to. You believed in me, but I... He shuddered. I want to make the right choice now. The masked salesman turned to face the boy's horse. Epona still looked at him oddly, though she looked more disgusted than anything else. I would be disgusted too. He remembered Navi screaming for Link to run as he'd come charging to take him. The hero of time. He looked at the dirt. For the first time, he wondered what happiness Link and Navi had shared. The hero was all that remained of her. I have to help him. He paused. I have to stop the demon before I die. He looked to the grave as if for confirmation. There's nothing left. This was his last chance. I don't expect you to forgive me, the masked salesman said to the fairy he loved. But I want to try to stop all of this madness. I want to help the next closest thing to you there is. The boy. But he also thought of the white fairy that flew with him now. Except her name is Tatl. He would have to accept her too, were he to join them. Even if she is a shadow. What to do first? He thought of all the terrible things he'd done to Link and realized that joining him might be impossible. If only I'd decided this a cycle sooner. But back then, he'd still been in control. There'd been no need for empathy. The masked salesman would have to prove his good intentions before he pleaded his case. The dark sorcerer rose to his feet by using the awning for support. The redid mask. He remembered his promise to Navi that he'd only use it once. I'll give it to Link. I'll give it to him through Anju, so he knows I'm done fighting. The masked salesman would have to meet him after, and given that Majora still appeared sealed away, the boy must have resumed his quest. Next will be Ikana Canyon or Great Bay. He guessed Great Bay, given that's where he'd hidden Tatl. The dark sorcerer would have to set his chess pieces in motion before the boy arrived, however. Or else he'll never believe me. He paused. The masked salesman turned to look at the beautiful sea. This might be the last time I ever see it. He watched the sparkling waters and remembered the gray sparrow's half-finished boat. I wonder if he ever wanted forgiveness too. Maybe that's what he was looking for across the sea. Epona buzzed her lips beside him, and the masked salesman smiled at her. I almost forgot your water. He took a step forward, but the pain in his chest seared again. He gasped, clutching it. I have to hurry. The rain fell all around them, and its smell was everywhere. The grass was soft beneath him, but the log's wood was much more uncomfortable. It sheltered them, even as the sounds of the storm broke through. Slowly, though, even they faded. Or maybe that's just me, since I'm dying. Just look into my eyes and listen, the masked salesman said, smiling wanly. Link held the mask of truth uncertainly, and Tatl merely watched them both in silence. I was a man before. I promise. I was a man. He felt tears come again, but he had no will to resist them. The masked salesman faced the eye that had once belonged to a woman named Maria. He felt its gaze invade his mind as the boy read his past, but the dark sorcerer allowed it. Please, learn everything. Know the man I used to be. Then it was done, and Link collapsed into the grass and backed away. Link and Tatl spoke, but the masked salesman could no longer understand them. Maria's piercing gaze had zapped his remaining strength. Oh, my name. It hadn't returned to him. He'd hoped it would when Link read his mind. The Grey Witch had her name when she died. He wanted that too. It truly was a dark, terrible price to not have even that in death. The masked salesman's eyes flickered to the fairy beside Link. Tatl met his stare, but didn't know what to say. But all the sorcerer saw was beauty. He smiled as the storm faded entirely. He was floating now, above and beyond the log. Oh, a golden moment. Except without sunshine. It was only her. He laughed, remembering the day they met as the darkness took him. What's your name?
Navi.
The white fairy smiled as she looked at the small boy shivering in the forest.
It's going to be okay, you know?
She gently touched his face, where tears had fallen to wet his cheeks. The red-headed boy sniffled, keeping his knees drawn in. No, it's not. He insisted. Mama and Papa are dead. How can things be okay?
Well, you're okay,
Navi said.
And you've met me. We can be okay together.
Her sweet smile briefly melted the boy's fear away. He wiped his nose and sniffled again. Oh, okay. I like the sound of that. A smile of his own soon appeared. I'm glad you found me. I didn't want to be alone. Navi's smile deepened.
I think we're going to be the best of friends.